Shalom, shalom, mishpachati. I am Adirah and
I am Rayah. Shalom.
Shalom, mishpachati. We are here together today to demonstrate how to make matzah for Passover and for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We are here today in Rabbi Neat's home. The wonderful Rabbi Shlomo
is behind the scenes.
Yes, he's behind the scenes. Taking these wonderful videos for you to learn how to make matzah at home with your family. This is a family affair, a family event. So we are teaching you how to make it at home on your own table, with your own family, and on your own appliances. Now you might think that it's very difficult or you need a lot of ingredients, but you don't. Actually, you need flour and water. And that's basically as simple as it gets. You can make it more elaborate if you like, less elaborate. But today, we are going to give you some suggestions about some recipes, ingredients that you can use. First ingredient that we have, most important, is the flour. The flour is very important in that it may not have come into contact during processing with any liquid, because we talk about the kamats. And it's important to choose your flour very, very circumspect about your flour. So this flour that we're using today is unbleached all-purpose flour. Okay, it cannot be self-rising flour because it will have the yeast in it, and we want to avoid that during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, so get unbleached all-purpose flour, and that will be just fine. About 1.5 cups of that will work perfectly, along with a teaspoon of wonderful pink salt. And we use the pink salt because it has a lot of the minerals that you will need in your body to rejuvenate and restore your systems. And we're also going to use for flavor some sage and some basil. So about a teaspoon of salt or less. If you have problems with your pressure, you don't have to use that much salt, just a sprinkle, and that will be fine. And some sage, about 1/2 teaspoonful with the 1.5 cups of your flour. And this is important. You want your water to be clean water, meaning purified water. Okay, so you use about 3/4 cups of water to your 1.5 cups of flour. And it might be different, so what we do always encourage you to do is add your water a little bit at a time. That's why we have the 2 cups here. So you have 1/2 cup of water, and then you have another 1/4 cup of water on the side. So you use that sparingly and introduce it a little bit at a time so that you don't add too much water. We also are going to add a bit of olive oil. And olive oil, you can either use the olive oil or you can eliminate the olive oil from your recipe if you like. But these are some of the suggestions that we have. And if you want to be very circumspect about your recipe, you can just go with the flour and water, and that will be perfectly fine. All right, so we're going to get started with 1.5 cups of flour. And I'd also like to say, while Rabbi is measuring out the flour, is that the unleavened bread was not only meant for the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Pesach, but oftentimes all the time actually, the rabbis, yes, the rabbis will use the unleavened bread for the sacrifices in the temple. And so that's an important thing to note, because you don't have to just go and make unleavened bread one time a year. You can make unleavened bread throughout the year and use it with all your recipes. Actually, it's much better because you're making it at home. You know what you're using in your ingredients that you're using, you know it's fresh. So you don't want to, and I would like to say, you don't want to keep your patties, you know, your unleavened bread for more than 3 days. Okay, so you make a little bits at a time, which is why we recommend just 1.5 cups of flour.
So are you saying that we can make it for breakfast
You
on
can.
a regular day, on regular days besides Passover?
Well, yes, you can absolutely, but if you're, trying to avoid bread that early in the morning,
Right.
just use it for your sandwiches or your wraps.
Okay, that's a good idea.
In the afternoon. And of course with your dinner. So we'll get started and add the water a little bit at a time. Let's start with the half a cup of water first. And then we just incorporate that in with the flour and the seasoning.
So should we add the water and
So
then
we add the seasoning.
Okay, so we add everything together. The
Add
water,
everything
okay,
together.
all right. And then you start mixing it in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And it'll all incorporate together as you go along.
Okay.
And as you're mixing, you'll see that it starts to clump. It'll start to clump up. And that's perfectly fine. Allow it to clump. And get the feel of that. And mix it right in all together. And let's just give them a really good look at what's happening here. It's starting to form. It's starting to form into a dough ball. Because you don't want it to get too sticky.
Right. How long is it supposed to take us to do this? Because during Passover, everything was done quickly, so we shouldn't take very long to mix this together. Am I correct?
You can take as long as you need to form the ball.
Okay.
You don't have to go into a panic or a frenzy with preparing this. Normally, just takes about 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes to get everything really, really good and get a good consistency and get that ball really, really kneaded the way it needs to be kneaded. But the most important thing is you want to continue to work the dough ball. So you continue to work the water and you continue to work it into a dough ball. And then after that, you still continue to work that dough. So everything is incorporated and the dough will become nice and soft and pliable. All right, so we are pounding the dough ball, and I wanted to make mention, as you had mentioned before, the dough has to be kneaded. It has to be kneaded quickly. All right, normally if you bake bread, you have to set it aside and cover it for about an hour or so that it rises. In this case, it won't have an opportunity because we're going to take such a limited amount of time to do it. And that is one of the things that is mentioned in the Exodus, how this bread was done in haste so that the Hebrews could leave quickly. Okay, so we are kneading, okay, and you can see here that the ball has formed and we have a nice, lovely ball of dough, which we are going to share, right? And so when we knead this dough, we also have to, during this process, think about the process. The process now is very easy. It does not rise if you work it constantly. So, given that information, you have to continually work your dough and making sure that everything is well constituted. And then when you get to your dough ball, you just take off small pieces to make your matzah.
So we could take off small pieces and put them aside and do everything.
So you roll it,
Right.
okay?
And then eventually just
You roll it,
set them out.
and then you turn on your pan. Your pans are on. And then you might take just a little bit of your flour and put it onto your surface so that you have a nice surface. Sorry. To work that into. All right. And we're going to use a bit of our oil in our pans. Just a small bit, doesn't have to be a lot.
And how high should we turn up the burners?
You do not have to have it very high, but a medium About a medium is good. It should be hot. It should not be warm. And then when you are spreading that matzah out to make it into a round disc, you want to constantly turn it and turn it and turn it so that you get a nice round disc. And if it doesn't work, then you try again. You push it back into a ball and you work it out again. Now, of course, you can use a rolling pin to do this, but if you don't have a rolling pin, then you can certainly use the back of your hand. And that would make a nice little round disc. And you can get your family involved in it. Everybody can be involved and have this experience. There's also a way that you can use your clean empty wine bottles and you can roll it out if you want to use it that way. But you want to make sure that it's nice and flat. And as round as possible. Okay.
So it can't be doughy. It has to be really, really flat, like a piece of paper.
Yes. Not too flat. And you don't need to make the holes in it either. The holes don't need to go into it. Some people like to put little decorations or holes into their matzah. That's not necessary. What is necessary is that you make sure that your flour has been selected properly, that it's kosher for Passover.
And it depends also on the size of the ball, how big you want to make your matzah, am I correct?
That's right, yes. So if you know that you want to make it for dinner just as a side with some horseradish or some other kind of dip, then you can make small pieces. But if you know you want to stuff it with some vegetables for a nice wrap, then you know you want to use a little more. I have to worry about if it puffs up. If it puffs up during the cooking time, that's okay. It just means it's cooking properly. It doesn't mean that it's rising. It's just going through that heating process and it's responding to the heat. But as you can tell, we did not give it any time to rise. We did not give it any time to set. We've been working it. Okay, so after our minute and a half or a minute or so, we want to flip on each side. Take it and flip it on each side. And as I had mentioned before, your pan can be dry and the same thing will occur. It just won't be oily. So you do have some options. Okay, you do not need the oil for it to have a good consistency. And you do not need the oil in order for it to remain unstuck from the pan. In this sense, we just use the oil as an extra ingredient. And use as big and round or as small as you like, depending upon what you want to use them for. So in this sense, we're going to use these for hors d'oeuvres. We're going to use these for the bitter herbs. We're going to use these for the Seder. So these are going to be nice and small. We're making enough for everyone. And so they'll be nice and small and manageable.
So I'm so accustomed to buy matzah in the supermarket. And they're really thin and dry and they're like crackers. Mm-hmm. So are they the best thing? Isn't it best to just do our own homemade as opposed to buying them in the supermarket?
Yes, it is definitely better to do your matzah at home and to make it a family affair, okay? Because everyone wants to learn. this is a custom that should be taught at home, should be taught to the children. It should be taught and made on a regular basis, like we mentioned before. It should not be just for any one occasion, but constantly doing it so people could get familiar with the process. But it doesn't have to be dry, and it should be fresh.
Is it because the reason why it's dry is it because it's been in the supermarket for a very long time, you think, and that's why it's best that we make it fresh daily?
No, the reason why it's dry in the supermarket is because it has been prepared that way. And you can absolutely prepare your matzah in the oven.
Oh, okay. We put sage in the first batch that we just made. Can
Yes.
we add? Could you tell us? What other types of flavors can we add to the matzah?
You can add any type of flavor that you like. I would stay away from the sugar though. It doesn't have to be sweet.
Right.
I would use things like sage or basil or rosemary, anything like
great.
that. Yes, to go in with your.
How about garlic?
Garlic, you can also use the garlic. You would crush the garlic, let the garlic sit on the side for about 10-15 minutes. That activates the sulfur in the garlic, so if you're ever using garlic, you know that you have to wait and have that activation.
And you know what will be great? Garlic with rosemary. You crush it, and garlic with like garlic and rosemary bread. So this will be garlic and rosemary matzah. I think we should try that next.
We can definitely try that next. We can absolutely try that next.
All right, so I'm going to taste it.
Yes, please do. Have a taste.
These are really delicious. Would you like to taste them? These are so delicious. Tom, do you think that it's rather unusual that we should be eating such delicious matzah during Passover because it's supposed to be a season of affliction?
Well, no. And I would say it can be just as delicious as it needs to be because it's made with love.
Right.
It's made with your own ingredients.
Right.
Okay. You use the sea salt or the pink salt or the black salt as opposed to the table salt. You use the unbleached all-purpose flour that hasn't come into contact with any type of leavening, any type of water. You use spices that you pick yourself. That is love. That generates love into your food. The reason why the box matzah doesn't have that doesn't replicate the love.
Right, because it's processed in a
and then you don't know how long it's set.
Right, exactly.
But if you do like crunchy matzah, and I will say, you can make your matzah crunchy and put your matzah instead of on a pan. You can put your matzah right in the oven. Okay, so you can also put your matzah right in the oven and make it crunchy.
Like the crackers.
Right, exactly, and make them crunchy.
Okay.
These are placed on top. They're baked, actually. They call it baking on top of the stove. Okay, but this is a wonderful method that you can use. You can turn those off.
Could you also bake it?
You can also put it right in the oven and bake it directly into the oven. So you have those options and you can also put the holes in with a fork.
Oh, okay.
But you don't have
make it look like the crackers. Oh,
exactly.
Okay.
If that's something that you're used to and you want to replicate that, just use the fork. And after you make your disc, you can just put the holes in with the fork, with the tongs of the fork, and then put it right into the oven. And you bake that in the oven for about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And you watch it. You watch it closely because you don't want it to get too brown or too crunchy, overcooked. It's not going to be a very good experience. But these do not have to be unpleasant to taste in order to give us a good sense of what the Passover and Feast of Unleavened is about, because that's what the bitter herbs, that's that portion of the Seder. The bitter herbs represent the the experience
Right.
in Mitzrayim. And so those bitter herbs, and you can use all types of bitter herbs. There's not only horseradish, you can use romaine lettuce, you can use other bitter herbs, you can look up bitter herbs.
Right.
And you can use an array of different spices for your matzah, and you can use your bitter herbs, and then you have the other components of your Seder to represent the different experiences that culminates into.
Right. So the matzah is a symbol. It's not because, I'm asking you about the deliciousness and so forth, but it's all symbolic of when we celebrate Passover. Everything that we eat is symbolic and represents.
Yes, the matzah represents the haste.
Right.
Okay, and then whereas the bitter herbs represents the feeling of turmoil and anguish
and sadness.
Yes. Yeah. So everything has its place.
Right.
For the last and final step of preparing your matzah, it's very important to note that your hands and your surfaces and everything that you use must be cleaned. So you want to make sure that you clean off your surfaces and clean off everything, your pans and everything. You go through the process of cleaning your home. So make sure your hands underneath your nails, your boards, your floor, even if you haven't spilled anything, your surfaces, your pans, your stove, your oven, everything gets cleaned of all kamas, okay, as quickly as possible. And so you may serve your matzah, and we do have this recipe, this delicious recipe for matzah on blackjuice.org, www.blackjuice.org. I have a health spot column on there also with some other tidbits of information that might be useful. But I do want to thank Rabbi Rayah for her help in preparing this wonderful and delicious matzah recipe for you today. And please do visit as often as possible. You were?
And it was delicious. And again, you've got to try the rosemary and garlic. That's the next recipe you can try.
Yes, yes.
Shalom Pesach and Shalom.
Shalom.